Commander Zektar stood in the briefing room aboard the galactic observation ship Velthara. His blue-scaled hands held a datapad that made no sense to him. The assignment seemed too simple for someone of his experience. After 20 years of watching alien wars across the galaxy, this felt like busy work. "You want me to watch humans fight?" Zektar asked Admiral Teshka. His voice carried the clicking sounds that all Velshan made when confused. "They are barely out of their home system. This war will be over in weeks." Admiral Teshka's large eyes looked away from Zektar. This worried the commander. In all his years of service, he had never seen the admiral avoid eye contact during a briefing. Something about this mission felt different. "The humans have been in space for only 300 years, the admiral said slowly. "They have basic ships and simple weapons. The Hegemony Coalition has 4 of the most powerful species in the galaxy. Their technology is thousands of years ahead of human science." Zektar nodded. This made sense. The Hegemony had been expanding across the galaxy for centuries. They had crushed dozens of younger species. Humans would be just another name on their list of conquered worlds. "So why send me?" Zektar asked. "Any junior observer could watch this. It will be over quickly." Admiral Teshka finally looked at him. Her eyes were darker than usual. "Because there are whispers, Commander. Old species in the deep void speak of patterns. They remember a type of warfare that has not been seen for 10,000 years. "What kind of warfare?" "The kind that changes everything." The admiral moved to the large window that showed the stars. "The kind that makes predators become prey." Zektar felt a chill run through his scales. The admiral was old, even by Velshan standards. She had lived through 3 galactic conflicts and had seen species rise and fall. If something worried her, it should worry him too. "What do the whispers say?" he asked. "They say that some species do not fight wars the way others do. Most species fight until they lose, then surrender. Some species fight until they win, then stop. But there are stories of species that fight differently. They fight to learn." Zektar did not understand. "All species learn during war." "No, Commander. Most species learn how to fight better. These species learn how to fight perfectly." The admiral turned back to him. "They learn their enemies completely, every weakness, every strength, every way of thinking. Then they use that knowledge like a weapon." "But humans are primitive. Their technology is basic. How could they be dangerous to the hegemony?" Admiral Teshka handed him another datapad. "Look at these reports from their border conflicts." Zektar read the files. They were strange. Human ships were losing every battle, but the reports felt wrong somehow. The humans should have given up months ago. Their colonies were being destroyed. Their people were dying, but they kept fighting. "Their losses are terrible," Zektar said. "Look closer. Look at how they lose." Zektar read again. "The human tactics changed after every defeat. When the hegemony used energy weapons, humans developed new armor. When the hegemony attacked supply lines, humans learned to fight without supplies. When the hegemony bombed planets, humans went underground and kept fighting. They adapt quickly," Zektar admitted, "faster than any species we have recorded. Each defeat teaches them something new. Each loss makes them stronger somehow." Zektar felt uneasy. "But they are still losing." "Are they?" The admiral's question hung in the air. "Or are they learning?" The commander looked at the files again. The human losses were massive, but something felt planned about them, as if the humans were not trying to win these early battles, as if they were trying to understand their enemies instead. "Your job is simple," Admiral Teshka said. "Watch the war. Record everything. Document how humans fight when they are losing. More importantly, document how they fight when they start winning." "You think they will start winning?" The admiral was quiet for a long moment. "Commander, in my 300 years of life, I have learned one thing about war. The species that treats war as education always defeats the species that treats war as tradition. Zektar prepared his ship for the journey to human space. His vessel was equipped with the best stealth technology in the galaxy. He could observe battles without being detected. He could record everything without being noticed. As his ship moved through hyperspace toward the war zone, Zektar reviewed what little was known about humans. They came from a single planet called Earth. Their world was mostly water with several large land masses. They had evolved as hunters, but they also grew plants for food. What made them unusual was their development speed. Most species took millions of years to develop technology. Humans had gone from simple tools to space travel in just a few thousand years. This was almost impossible, but the records were clear. They also had something called imagination that seemed stronger than in other species. They could think about things that did not exist and then make them real. This had helped them develop new technologies very quickly. But none of this explained why Admiral Teshka seemed worried. Imagination and fast development were useful, but they were not weapons. The hegemony had better ships, better weapons, and much more experience. Zektar's ship dropped out of hyperspace near the human colony world of Kepler 442. Long-range sensors showed hegemony battle groups surrounding the planet. Human ships were trying to evacuate civilians, but they were greatly outnumbered. The commander activated his recording systems and settled in to watch what he expected would be a brief, one-sided battle. The humans had 3 old cargo ships converted into warships. The hegemony had 50 modern battle cruisers. It should have been over in minutes. But as Zektar watched, he realized that something about this battle felt different. The humans were not fighting like any species he had ever observed. They were not trying to win. They were not even trying to survive. They were studying their enemies while they died. And that realization made Zektar understand why the whispers in the deep void spoke of species that fought to learn. Because learning could be more dangerous than winning. The battle ended with the humans retreating, but Zektar noticed something that chilled him. The human ships had recorded everything. They had tested hegemony weapons, tactics, and responses. They had died learning, and they had learned very well indeed. Zektar moved his observation ship closer to Kepler 442. The planet looked peaceful from space, with blue oceans and green continents that reminded him of many worlds he had seen. But his sensors told a different story. Hegemony forces were preparing for a full planetary assault. The human evacuation had failed. Most of the civilian population was still on the planet when the hegemony fleet arrived. According to galactic warfare rules, the humans should surrender now to save innocent lives. Every civilized species would make this choice, but the humans did not surrender. Instead, they did something that made no sense to Zektar. The human military forces spread across the planet's surface. They took positions in cities, mountains, forests, and deserts. They were preparing to fight on the ground against an enemy that controlled space. "This is madness," Zektar said to himself. Ground forces could not defeat orbital bombardment. The hegemony could destroy the entire planet from space if they wanted to. But as Zektar watched, he began to understand why the humans were not surrendering. They were not trying to save their planet. They were trying to make the hegemony come down and fight them face to face. The hegemony commanders must have thought the same thing Zektar did. They began bombing military targets from orbit. Their energy weapons destroyed human bases, supply depots, and command centers. The humans seemed helpless against this attack, but then something strange happened. Instead of breaking, the human forces became more organized. They moved their supplies underground. They built new command centers in caves and tunnels. They took their military equipment apart and hid the pieces in different places. Most importantly, they started adapting their tactics in real time. Zektar watched in fascination as human engineers turned mining equipment into weapons. Giant drilling machines became mobile artillery. Earth-moving vehicles became armored transports. Even construction robots were changed into fighting machines. When the hegemony destroyed their communication systems, the humans created new ones using civilian technology. When their power plants were bombed, they built smaller generators that were harder to find. When their weapons factories were destroyed, they started making new weapons in basements and hidden workshops. But what impressed Zektar most was how they organized their people. Human children who looked too young to fight were running messages between units. Elderly humans who could barely walk were coordinating supply lines. Even wounded humans who should have been in medical care were planning new defenses. The hegemony commanders grew frustrated with bombing empty targets. They decided to send ground forces to finish the job quickly. This was exactly what the humans had been waiting for. Zektar's recordings from the first ground battle would later be studied by military academies across the galaxy. The humans did not fight like any species he had ever seen. They did not form battle lines or use traditional tactics. Instead, they fought like the planet itself was alive and angry. Human soldiers appeared from nowhere, attacked hegemony forces, then disappeared back into the landscape. They used the planet's weather against their enemies. They caused landslides and floods. They poisoned water sources and destroyed bridges just before hegemony forces needed to cross them. Most disturbing to Zektar was how the humans fought when they were wounded. Other species became less effective when injured. They needed medical care and time to recover, but wounded humans seemed to fight with even more intensity, as if pain made them stronger instead of weaker. He recorded one incident that would haunt his dreams for years. A human soldier lost both legs in an explosion, but continued fighting from the ground for 3 more hours. She used a broken energy rifle to hold off an entire hegemony squad, while other humans evacuated civilians. When her weapon finally stopped working, she threw rocks with deadly accuracy until enemy fire silenced her. The hegemony forces were trained and experienced. Their technology was superior. Their numbers were overwhelming, but they started taking casualties at a rate that shocked their commanders. More importantly, they started making mistakes. The humans seemed to understand exactly how each hegemony species thought and fought. They knew that the insect-like klaxons would always attack in straight lines. They knew that the reptilian saurians were weak in cold temperatures. They knew that the energy beings called phantoms became confused in electromagnetic storms. The humans created specific traps for each enemy species. They fought 4 different wars at the same time, using different tactics against each type of hegemony soldier. This should have been impossible for such a young species, but somehow the humans made it work. Zektar realized that the humans were not just defending their planet. They were conducting experiments on their enemies. Each battle was a test to see how hegemony forces would react to different situations. The humans were learning their enemies' weaknesses while fighting for their lives. The battle for Kepler 442 lasted 3 months. The hegemony finally won, but their victory felt hollow. They had lost 30% of their forces taking one small human colony. The planet was destroyed, but the cost was higher than anyone had expected. As Zektar reviewed his recordings, he noticed something that made his scales shiver. The surviving humans were not broken by defeat. They looked satisfied, as if the battle had gone exactly as they planned. They had lost their world, but they had gained something more valuable. They had learned how to fight the hegemony. The evacuation ships that escaped the planet were filled not just with refugees, but with detailed information about hegemony tactics, technology, and psychology. Every human death had been recorded and analyzed. Every enemy reaction had been measured and cataloged. The humans had turned their own defeat into a learning opportunity. Zektar filed his first report with growing unease. The humans had lost this battle, but they had fought unlike any species he had ever observed. They did not seem to understand the concept of hopeless situations. They treated every disadvantage as a puzzle to solve rather than a reason to surrender. Most disturbing was their attitude toward casualties. Other species mourned their dead and tried to minimize losses. The humans mourned their dead too, but they also studied exactly how each person had died and what could be learned from it. They treated every death as data that could help them fight better next time. As his ship moved toward the next battle zone, Zektar found himself thinking about Admiral Teshka's words. She had said that some species fight to learn. Now he was beginning to understand what she meant. The humans were not just losing battles. They were conducting the largest military research project in galactic history, and they were using the hegemony as their unwilling test subjects. This realization filled Zektar with a fear he had never felt before, because if the humans were truly learning from every defeat, then each loss was making them stronger, and eventually students become smarter than their teachers. 6 months after Kepler 442, Zektar was watching a different kind of war. The humans were still losing most battles, but something had changed. Each defeat looked more planned than the last. The humans were no longer fighting to win individual battles. They were fighting to win something bigger. Zektar's ship followed the hegemony fleet to the Ross 128 system. Intelligence reports said this was where humans were making their final stand. 3 human worlds remained in this system, and the hegemony was bringing their largest fleet to finish the job. But when the hegemony arrived, they found something unexpected. The human fleet was waiting for them, but not in a defensive position. The human ships were spread across the entire system in small groups. This made no tactical sense. Small groups of ships could be destroyed easily by the larger hegemony fleet. Zektar watched in confusion as the battle began. The human ships did not try to group together for protection. Instead, they attacked in waves that seemed designed to fail. Each wave was destroyed quickly, but not before accomplishing something specific. The first wave tested hegemony shields and recorded their energy signatures. The second wave tested their weapons and measured their effective range. The third wave tested their communications and learned their command frequencies. Each sacrificial attack gathered specific information. Then Zektar realized what the humans were doing. They were not fighting a battle. They were conducting a detailed analysis of their enemies while pretending to fight normally. The hegemony commanders were pleased with their easy victory. They had destroyed most of the human fleet without losing many ships, but their celebration ended when they tried to attack the human planets. The planets were empty. Not abandoned, but evacuated in a way that made no sense. The humans had left behind everything that looked valuable, but taken everything that actually mattered. The cities were full of fake equipment designed to look important. The real military supplies had been moved to hidden locations throughout the system. More disturbing was what the humans had left behind. Instead of normal defensive systems, they had created what they called information warfare. Every computer system on the planets was designed to infect hegemony technology with viruses that did not destroy anything important. Instead, these viruses slowly changed small details in enemy data. Navigation systems became slightly less accurate. Communication systems developed tiny delays. Weapon targeting became marginally less precise. None of these changes were big enough to notice immediately, but together they created doubt and confusion among hegemony forces. The humans had also left behind psychological weapons that Zektar had never seen before. Hidden transmitters broadcast specific sounds and images designed to disturb each hegemony species in different ways. The insect-like klaxons heard frequencies that reminded them of their natural predators. The reptilian saurians saw flashing lights that triggered hibernation responses. The energy beings called phantoms were exposed to electromagnetic patterns that disrupted their thinking. But the most terrifying weapon was information itself. The humans had studied hegemony psychology so completely that they knew exactly what fears each species carried. They created broadcasts that exploited these fears without seeming to threaten anything directly. Zektar listened to one of these broadcasts with growing horror. It was a simple news report about human casualties, but it was designed specifically for klaxon listeners. The report mentioned details about Klaxon biology that only Klaxons knew about themselves. It discussed Klaxon weakness patterns in ways that seemed innocent, but were actually threats. The message was clear. Humans knew things about Klaxons that Klaxons did not know humans could know. This created a level of psychological fear that no physical weapon could match. The same technique was used on every hegemony species. Humans revealed knowledge about enemy cultures, biology, and psychology that should have been impossible for them to possess. They did this casually, as if such knowledge was common among humans. The effect on hegemony morale was devastating. Soldiers began to doubt their own security. If humans knew their weaknesses so well, what else did humans know? Were their communication codes broken? Were their strategies predicted? Were their thoughts being monitored? Zektar realized that the humans had weaponized paranoia itself. The battle for Ross 128 ended with hegemony victory, but it felt like defeat. They had conquered empty planets and gained nothing useful. Meanwhile, human forces had escaped with detailed information about hegemony fleet movements, technology capabilities, and psychological weaknesses. More importantly, the humans had planted seeds of doubt in enemy minds that would grow stronger with time. As Zektar followed the war to other systems, he began to see the full pattern of human strategy. They were not fighting to hold territory. They were fighting to understand their enemies completely while making their enemies doubt themselves. Each battle was part of a larger plan that extended across multiple star systems. Human defeats in one location created advantages in other locations. Information gathered during losing battles was used to plan winning strategies months later. The humans also began using weapons that violated every understanding of civilized warfare. They did not attack enemy soldiers directly. Instead, they attacked the enemy's ability to think clearly, communicate effectively, and trust their own perceptions. Zektar watched in fascination as human forces began winning battles without firing shots. They would disable enemy ships by overloading their systems with false information. They would capture enemy positions by making defenders believe they were surrounded when they were not. Most disturbing was how humans treated prisoners. Other species either killed enemies or kept them in simple prisons. Humans studied their prisoners like scientists studying interesting specimens. They learned everything about enemy psychology, culture, and military training. Then they used this knowledge to predict how other enemy forces would behave. The captured soldiers were eventually released, but they returned to their units changed. They had been exposed to human analysis techniques that revealed things about themselves they had never understood. Many could no longer fight effectively because they had become too aware of their own psychological patterns. The humans had turned prisoner exchange into a form of psychological warfare. By the end of his first year of observation, Zektar understood why Admiral Teshka had seemed worried. The humans were not just learning to fight the hegemony. They were learning to fight in ways that no species had ever fought before. They treated war as a science rather than an art. They studied their enemies with the same intensity that other species used to study natural phenomena. They developed theories about enemy behavior, tested these theories in battle, and refined their understanding based on results. Most terrifying was their systematic approach to psychological manipulation. They did not use fear as an emotion. They used fear as a tool, carefully applied in specific doses to achieve specific results. They understood enemy minds better than enemies understood themselves. Zektar's reports were now classified at the highest levels of galactic intelligence. Military commanders who read them requested additional confirmation because the described tactics seemed impossible. But Zektar's recordings proved that everything was real. The humans were changing the nature of warfare itself. They were creating new rules that other species did not understand. And they were winning by fighting wars that their enemies did not realize they were fighting. As his ship moved toward the next battle zone, Zektar found himself wondering what would happen when humans stopped learning and started teaching. Because eventually, every student becomes a master of their subject, and the subject humans were mastering was their enemies. 2 years into the war, Zektar stopped filing regular reports. His superiors had classified his observations so highly that only 3 beings in the galactic government were allowed to read them. What he was documenting could change the balance of power in the entire galaxy. The humans had stopped losing. More accurately, they had stopped accepting losses that did not serve their greater strategy. When they lost battles now, those defeats accomplished specific goals that became clear weeks or months later. Every human casualty was part of a plan that extended far beyond individual engagements. Zektar's ship was positioned near Proxima Centauri, where the largest hegemony fleet in history was preparing to destroy the human homeworld. Earth itself was under threat. The hegemony had brought their most experienced commanders and their most advanced ships. This should have been the final battle of the war. But something was wrong with the enemy fleet. Zektar's sensors detected arguments among hegemony commanders. The different species were not cooperating as they once had. Klaxon ships were avoiding formations that included Saurian vessels. Phantom energy beings were refusing to share tactical information with other species. The carefully built alliance was breaking apart from within. The humans had done this deliberately. Through careful psychological manipulation over many months, human forces had planted specific fears and doubts in each hegemony species about their allies. They had made Klaxons believe that Saurians were planning to betray them. They had convinced Saurians that phantoms were reading their thoughts without permission. They had made phantoms believe that their solid matter allies were planning to trap them in physical containers. None of these fears were based on truth, but they felt true because humans had studied each species so completely that they knew exactly which lies would be most believable. When the battle for Earth began, Zektar watched something that would haunt him forever. The human fleet was still outnumbered 10-1, but numbers no longer mattered. The humans had become masters of their enemies' psychology. Human ships did not attack hegemony vessels directly. Instead, they maneuvered in ways that forced different enemy species to interfere with each other. A human destroyer would position itself so that Klaxon ships had to choose between hitting their target or avoiding friendly Saurian vessels. Human fighters would lead phantom energy beings into areas where their electromagnetic fields would disrupt solid matter ships' electronics. The hegemony fleet began fighting itself more than it fought humans. But the truly horrifying part was how humans handled captured enemy vessels. Other species either destroyed enemy ships or kept them as prizes. Humans did something different. They analyzed captured ships completely, learned everything about their technology and design philosophy, then sent them back to enemy fleets. The returned ships worked perfectly, but they carried modifications that were invisible to their crews. Human-installed systems monitored everything these ships did and transmitted detailed information back to human forces. More importantly, these systems slowly influenced crew behavior in subtle ways. Klaxon ships returned with systems that made tiny sounds their crews could not consciously hear, but which gradually increased their stress levels. Saurian ships had environmental controls modified to make crews slightly more aggressive than normal. Phantom vessels carried electromagnetic generators that created confusion and paranoia among energy beings. The hegemony commanders never realized that their own ships were being turned into weapons against them. Zektar documented the most disturbing battle tactic he had ever seen. Human forces began using what they called surgical empathy. They studied individual enemy commanders so completely that they could predict not just what those commanders would do, but what they would feel while doing it. During one engagement, Zektar watched human forces manipulate a Saurian commander named Vexthor into a situation where he had to choose between saving his own ship or saving ships commanded by his own offspring. The humans knew exactly how Saurian family bonds worked. They knew that Vexthor would sacrifice himself to save his children, even though his tactical knowledge was more valuable than theirs. The humans were not just defeating their enemies, they were controlling their enemies' emotions and decisions with precision that seemed impossible. But the most terrifying moment came when Zektar observed a human interrogation of captured hegemony officers. He expected to see torture or violence. Instead, he saw something far worse. The human interrogators did not hurt their prisoners. They simply talked to them. But these conversations were designed with scientific precision to reveal everything about enemy psychology. Humans asked questions that seemed innocent, but which exposed deep fears, hidden motivations, and unconscious biases. Within hours, human interrogators understood captured enemies better than those enemies understood themselves. They learned about family relationships, personal fears, professional ambitions, and cultural values. They discovered psychological patterns that even the prisoners did not realize they had. Then they used this knowledge to predict how similar enemy officers would behave in future situations. The captured officers were eventually released in prisoner exchanges, but they returned to their units fundamentally changed. They had been exposed to a level of psychological analysis that revealed uncomfortable truths about themselves and their species. Many could no longer command effectively because they had become too aware of their own mental patterns. The humans had weaponized self-awareness. As the war entered its final phase, Zektar realized that the hegemony was not losing because humans had better technology or superior numbers. They were losing because humans had learned to fight wars inside enemy minds. Every hegemony strategy was predicted and countered before it could be implemented. Every hegemony weakness was exploited with surgical precision. Every hegemony strength was turned into a disadvantage through careful manipulation of circumstances. Most disturbing was that humans showed mercy as a strategic choice rather than an emotional impulse. They spared enemy lives when those lives served their purposes. They destroyed enemy forces when destruction was more useful than capture. They made every decision based on cold analysis of what would most effectively achieve their goals. The final battle of the war lasted only 6 hours. The hegemony fleet surrendered not because they were defeated, but because they could no longer trust themselves to think clearly. Human psychological warfare had made them doubt their own perceptions and decisions. The surrender was negotiated by the same human officers who had been losing battles 2 years earlier. But now these officers demonstrated understanding of hegemony psychology that was more complete than what most hegemony citizens had of their own species. As Zektar filed his final battle report, he realized that he had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans had not just won a war. They had redefined what war meant. They had proven that victory belonged not to the species with the best weapons, but to the species that best understood their enemies. And humans understood their enemies completely. The war was over, but Zektar knew that human victory was only the beginning. Because a species that could learn its enemies so thoroughly during war could probably learn everything about everyone during peace. And what humans learned, they remembered forever. The war was over, but Zektar could not stop watching the humans. Something about their behavior after victory disturbed him more than anything he had seen during the fighting. Other species celebrated conquest or mourned losses. Humans did something different. They prepared. Zektar's final assignment was to document human peace negotiations with the defeated hegemony. He expected to see the usual post-war activities: territory division, resource allocation, prisoner repatriation. Instead, he observed the most systematic analysis of foreign cultures ever recorded. The human negotiators did not just discuss terms of surrender, they conducted detailed interviews with every hegemony representative. These conversations seemed friendly and respectful, but Zektar recognized the techniques. They were the same methods humans had used to study captured prisoners during the war. The humans were learning everything about every species they now had contact with. Human diplomats asked questions about Klaxon reproductive cycles and social hierarchies. They inquired about saurian religious beliefs and economic systems. They studied phantom energy patterns and communication methods. They presented these questions as cultural curiosity, but Zektar knew better. The humans were mapping their former enemies' minds just as completely as they had during warfare. But the negotiations revealed something even more disturbing. The humans had detailed psychological profiles of every major galactic species, not just the ones they had fought. Their files contained information about the Vel-Shan, Zektar's own people, even though humans and Vel-Shan had never been in conflict. When Zektar realized this, his scales turned pale with fear. Humans had been studying every species in the galaxy while fighting for their lives. They had somehow found time during a desperate war to analyze potential allies, neutral parties, and distant civilizations. The scope of human intelligence gathering was beyond anything previously imagined. Zektar requested a private meeting with the human military commander, General Sarah Chen. He told himself this was for his final report, but he really needed to understand what humans truly were. General Chen was smaller than most species Zektar had encountered. She looked fragile compared to the armored Klaxons or massive saurians. But when she spoke, Zektar felt like he was talking to something vast and dangerous that was hiding inside a deceptively small form. "Commander Zektar," the general said, somehow pronouncing his name perfectly despite the clicking sounds that most species could not make. "We know you have been observing us. We appreciate your professionalism during this difficult time." Zektar was shocked. "You knew I was watching?" General Chen smiled, and the expression was somehow both friendly and terrifying. "We have known about your ship since the first week of the war. We chose not to interfere because your observations served our purposes." "What purposes?" "We wanted the galaxy to know what we are capable of. Your reports will serve as an excellent educational tool for other species who might consider us as enemies." Zektar felt cold despite his ship's heating systems. "You planned for me to document your capabilities?" "We planned for everything, Commander. That is what we do. We study all possibilities and prepare for each one." General Chen moved to a display screen that showed star maps of the entire galaxy. "Tell me, what do you think peace means to humans?" Zektar thought carefully before answering. "An end to fighting?" "No. Peace means the absence of external threats to our continued learning." The general touched the screen, and it showed detailed information about dozens of galactic species. "War taught us much about our immediate neighbors, but we have much more to learn about everyone else." The screen displayed information that made Zektar's breathing stop. Humans had psychological profiles, technological assessments, and strategic analyses for every major civilization in known space. Some of these species lived thousands of light years away and had no contact with human territory. "How do you have all this information?" Zektar asked. "The same way we learn to defeat the hegemony. We study, we observe, we analyze, we understand." General Chen's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she was discussing the weather. "During the war, we sent research teams to every inhabited system we could reach. They posed as traders, refugees, or simple travelers. They gathered cultural information while our homeworld burned." Zektar realized that humans had been preparing for galactic domination even while fighting for survival. They had never been just trying to win a war. They had been conducting the largest intelligence operation in galactic history. "But why?" he asked. "Why study everyone?" "Because knowledge is the only true weapon, Commander. Fleets can be destroyed, planets can be conquered, but understanding cannot be taken away once it is gained." The general turned to face him directly. We learned during our war that every species can be defeated if you know enough about them. Every weakness can be exploited if you understand it completely. You are planning to conquer the galaxy? General Chen looked genuinely surprised. Conquer? No, Commander. Conquest requires force. And force is inefficient. We prefer understanding. I do not understand the difference. Conquest means controlling others through strength. Understanding means controlling others by knowing them better than they know themselves. The general gestured to the star map. Why would we need to conquer the galaxy when we can simply make sure that every decision made by every species serves our long-term interests? Zektar felt a fear deeper than anything he had experienced during the war. You plan to manipulate entire civilizations? We plan to understand them completely. Manipulation is just one possible application of that understanding. General Chen's voice remained friendly, but her words carried implications that chilled Zektar to his core. Every species has predictable behavior patterns. Every culture has exploitable weaknesses. Every civilization has fears that can be managed and desires that can be directed. But what about free will? What about the right of species to choose their own paths? Every species is free to choose whatever path they wish, the general said. We simply make sure that the paths they wish to choose are the ones that serve galactic stability under human guidance. Zektar understood now why the whispers in the deep void spoke of species that fought to learn. Humans had not just won a war. They had become something that the galaxy had never seen before, a species that treated all other species as subjects for study and eventual management. Will you share this information with other species? General Chen asked. I do not know. Should I? That choice is yours, Commander. But consider this. Every species in the galaxy now faces the same decision that the hegemony faced. They can choose to be allies who work with humans toward mutual understanding, or they can choose to be problems that require more direct solutions. Zektar left the meeting with his mind spinning. Humans were offering the galaxy a choice, but it was not really a choice at all. Submit to human analysis and eventual guidance, or risk becoming targets for the same systematic destruction that had broken the hegemony. As he prepared his final report, Zektar realized that he had to include a warning that might save or doom galactic civilization. Humans were not conquerors in any traditional sense. They were something far more dangerous. They were gardeners who viewed other species as plants to be cultivated for optimal growth within a garden designed by human intelligence. In his last entry, Zektar wrote words that would echo through galactic politics for generations to come. Recommendation: under no circumstances should any galactic power consider humanity as an enemy. Not because they cannot be defeated, but because in the attempt, they will learn too much about us. And what humans learn, they never forget. They have become the galaxy's apex predator, not through strength, but through understanding. They do not conquer worlds, they conquer minds. And once a human understands you completely, you belong to them whether you realize it or not. Zektar sealed his report and sent it to Galactic Intelligence Headquarters. Then he set course for the deepest void he could find. Some knowledge was too dangerous to carry, and he had learned far too much about what humans really were. Behind him, human ships began spreading across the galaxy, carrying diplomats and traders and scholars who would study every species they encountered with the same deadly precision that had destroyed the hegemony. The age of human understanding had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.